The godswood inside the red keep had no face to watch her. No pale bark carved with eyes, only a stand of cypress and beech and the slow, green mirror of a pool in which the sky drifted by like a discarded cloak. Sansa knelt beneath an orange tree whose glossy leaves gave off a faint, bitter perfume. She pressed her hands together to pray, but the words seemed to float to the ceiling of air and collapse there, as useless as little paper boats that took on water and sank. The old gods had no eyes in King's Landing. The new ones had too many, and none of them were kind. She wore the net of black amethysts because Ser Dantos had begged her to keep it always close, for luck, and because it made her hair glimmer with a quiet dark fire that the queen did not notice. The stones lay smooth and cold against her fingers when she touched them, a nervous habit she despised and could not stop. It comforted her to feel the order of the net's lattice, the regularities of border and line. She had learned to love order, the way a hunted animal loves a thorn maze that confounds the hounds. The city breathed behind the garden wall. A million lungs, a thousand throats. There were the cries of hawkers on the street of flour, clatter of carts, the bell at the great September, the thin scraping whine of a whetstone on a blade. And beyond that, farther still, the old, felt hum of the sea. The day was pale and brittle, a winter day in everything but snow. She had dreamed of snow the night before. Flakes like falling magnolias, a hush laid over everything, the stink of the city miraculously erased. When she woke to the heat and smell, it felt like a lie her body had told her. Footsteps sounded on the gravel path, quick, light, used to moving around people with eyes on them. The smell of roses arrived first, then the rustle of silk. "You look very devout for a girl with no gods to hear her," the old woman said cheerfully, as if remarking on the weather. She came with a maid and her cane and a wreath of thorns worked into the brooch at her breast. The little eyes in her face were as hard as buttons on a funeral shirt. "Up now. Prayers are better walked than knelt. They go farther if you send them abroad." Sansa rose, smoothing her skirts. "My lady, child, I am every lady in this city and none of them," the Queen of Thorns said. "What I am is tired. Walk me, and do not tread on that broken flagstone. I have tripped on it twice, and I'll have the head of the man who laid it." They paced beneath the oranges along the pool. Olenna Tyrell's cane clicked, and the old woman's mouth clicked with it. Small words, small sounds, as if she were a bird considering which fruit to peck. "I am told you sing sweetly," she said. "Do you know my granddaughter's ballads? She knows too many of them. I have often told her a queen does better for knowing fewer songs and more accounts." "Marjorie is very kind to everyone," Sansa said, which was true and almost enough. "The people adore her." "People adore bread and circuses," the old woman said. "Harder to keep them when the baker burns the loaves and the elephants gore the ugly men we hire to be gored." She stopped, raising the cane tip to Sansa's hair. "What is that on your head? It shines so pretty I want to turn off the sun." Sansa forced herself to smile. "A gift. The old woman's fingers were not nearly so frail as they looked. They darted with a sparrow's speed, settled, adjusted, and when they withdrew, Sansa felt the faintest scratch of something brittle against her scalp, like the dust a jewel leaves when pressed too hard. "I should not wear black," Sansa said, to distract. "It doesn't suit my hair. The city doesn't suit your blood," the Queen of Thorns said, her bright eyes narrowing. "But one makes do." She tapped the cane and began again to move. "Your father had a solemn jaw. Men with solemn jaws do not bend easily. He did not bend, and then he could not breathe. Stern men are like old doors. One must oil their hinges or else they creak and then they crack. I am telling you this because I am old and old women are allowed to say what they please." Sansa said nothing. She felt the fragile grit beneath one nail where the old woman's fingers had been, a memory of pressure. When she brought her hand to her hair as if to smooth it, the pad of her fingertip came away violet smudged. She wiped the color on her skirt and felt her pulse flutter near burst. It had been there all along then, and no one had ever told her in words. "The city shifts under us," the Queen of Thorns said briskly. "The king is to marry. Some kings do it as a duty, some as a sport. "Your little husband, which sort of husband is he?" She did not wait for an answer. "Ah well, I didn't imagine you would answer. You would make a better queen than many I have known." "I am no queen," Sansa said. The words felt like a door closing softly. "Not yet." The old woman sighed, as if bored with the limitations of the present. "Come to the tasting tonight. My girls are to choose creams and pastries, and the men are to pretend they have an opinion about soups. You will taste with Marjorie. It is tedious. I prefer my food without debate. But cooks are artists. Deny them an audience and they sulk. Mind your step." She was gone as quickly as she had come, her women flowing around her, the cane clicking. Sansa stood, listening to the garden's breath. The brittle dust under her nail burned like a brand. The strangler, Dantos had called it, in a voice grown thin with wine and fear. He had not meant to tell her the name, but it had slipped out like a fish from an unwise hand. He had begged forgiveness, and then he had begged for coin. After that, he had sat weeping beneath a fig tree until she could not bear to watch him any longer. The strangler, it dissolved in wine. It made throats close as if some invisible hand had reached up from the belly and pinched the windpipe shut. Purple lips, purple face. The old gods had no eyes in King's Landing. The new ones watched and counted and kept no oaths. In the evening, the red keep hummed like a beehive under a hot stone. Squires ran with messages and platters. Dogs stalked. A boy with sweaty hair tapped at crystal goblets with a small golden spoon until the tone pleased him. Sansa stood behind Marjorie's left shoulder and tried to make her breath regular. The hairnet lay cool on her head, innocently neat. Under her glove, the small amethyst she had worked free earlier lay like a ready sin. The room had been hung with tapestries showing kings who had not existed and lions larger than houses. The fire burned a low copper. Cersei was already drinking. The queen's mouth held a smile that did not touch her eyes. Pycelle had the damp look of a fish on a rock. Tywin Lannister, pale as scraped bone, surveyed the room with the unsleeping look of a vulture awaiting the moment a calf's hind leg fails. Joffrey shouted at a dog, and then at a page, and then at no one at all. He wore green velvet trimmed in gold thread and a collar that bit his throat and made him lovelier than any of his words. Tyrion came late, tidy as a ledger, and stood as far from his sister as the table allowed. "You shall advise on the sauces, Lady Sansa," Joffrey said when he saw her. "You are used to insipid northern fare. It will amuse me to hear you praise salt." "I will praise what is worthy," Sansa said, making her voice meek and steady. She folded her hands the way Septa Mordain had taught, the way queens did in the tapestries while men bled for them. Her heart beat so hard she feared it would strike the amethyst to powder all on its own. Marjorie tasted first. She had a talent for graceful bites, for laughter that made men lean forward to receive it like warmth. Her eyes went soft with pleasure over the apricot cream. She wrinkled her nose at a spice that had tried too hard to be interesting. The cooks, lined against the wall like prisoners awaiting judgment, watched with the slightly crazed hope of men who had worked long at something useless. When the wine was poured, the king wanted the heavy cup with the lion heads, and he wanted it full. He raised it with one hand and drank with the other so that the light caught both sides of his face. He was his mother's son when he did that. There was an old joke in Winterfell about men who knew their best angles. Sansa had not understood it then. "Too dry," he said, licking his lip. "Bring the other, the sweet." Page ran. The ewer of the arbor's gold and honey came, the glow of it, the smell like summer-aged apples. It was the wine they had set aside as if it were a father's sword. Tyrion reached for the pitcher and Cersei put her hand out sharply, too sharp, and drew it back with a frown as if she had not meant to be seen. The moment hung like a bead of melted wax refusing to fall. "I will pour," Sansa heard herself say. "Your Grace." The boy liked to be called that. He preened when she said it and dragged his cup nearer. "At last, your little wife is good for something." He glanced at Tyrion, and the space of air between them seemed to ache. Sansa lifted the ewer. It was not heavy. It wanted only to be tipped. The amethyst in her glove had cracked. The outer crust flaked away with her nervous rubbing. Between thumb and finger, she held the powder that had once been a gem. She could not feel it for the thudding in her palm. When she tilted the ewer, the wine's golden ribbon lay thick, lovely, and whole. Her hand shook. She steadied it by imagining a wolf's head lowered to drink, the ripple of fur, the long tongue, a winter stream that did not complain. Beside her, Marjorie said something bright and harmless. Across from her, Cersei's fingernails scratched lightly on the table as if counting a rhythm. It was a simple thing, the smallest movement. Her little finger drifted, caught the cup's inner rim, and with the lightest rub she loosed the dust beneath her glove. The poison fell as snow falls in a dream, scarcely there. It touched the wine and gave no sign. She withdrew her hand. The amethyst's nothingness clung in the lines of her glove. She lowered the ewer and did not spill a drop. When she set it down, her arm felt heavy as a smith's. Joffrey took the cup. For an instant he held it, studying her face with a curiosity that was nothing like kindness. Then he drank as boys drink when they wish to seem men, deep and without a thought for breath. It did not happen immediately. That was the first cruelty. There were 3 heartbeats in which Sansa believed she had done a wicked, stupid thing and that nothing would come of it, that the gods or the chance of the room would make a mock of her and leave her with nothing but powder on a glove and a sin in her stomach. On the 4th heartbeat, the king coughed. He coughed again. He frowned and licked his lips. On the 5th, he dragged in a breath that did not satisfy his greedy lungs, and his nostrils flared wide like a spooked horse's. The color rose in his cheeks, at first prettily, then not. His hand went to his throat. "What now?" Cersei said, impatience drawn in a fine black line through the word. Joffrey tried to speak and could not. The sound he made was a rasp, a saw across damp wood. He clawed at the collar that had made him lovely, tore at it, and the gold thread snapped like old web. He rose to his feet without any of his grace and toppled the cup, and the sweet wine went like a skein of sunlight across the table and down onto the rushes. "Your Grace," Marjorie said, white at the mouth and not moving otherwise. She was a brave girl. Sansa liked her more than before for not screaming. Then the screaming began from elsewhere. The king's mouth went purple at the corners. His lips turned the color of plum flesh. He tried to draw breath and failed, and his eyes found Sansa because hers were there to be found, because they always had been. For one foolish, miserable moment she wanted only to give him air, as if it could be given, as if breath were a coin a girl might press into a boy's palm and change the terms of the world. He fell to his knees. His hand went to the table. He made a sound like a boy makes when learning to fight, and then another like a man makes when dying. Cersei moved at last. She came not as a mother but as a storm. She knocked aside a stool and was beside him in an instant, dragging him, crooning nonsense, sobbing words that would have shamed her yesterday. Pycelle lurched, rattling, and the king's guard became a white-clad confusion of drawn steel and shouted orders that meant nothing. Tywin did not move at all at first. He watched, the way a vulture watches the space between lightning and thunder. "Poison," he said finally, very softly, as if naming a friend he had expected. "Get the cup." Tyrion stood rooted, as if a child had chalked a circle around him. Sansa saw him as if from a great height. The neat doublet, the set of the mouth too used to being clever to look dumbstruck. She saw his eyes, and in them the helpless truth. He had not known. How strange, to be certain of another soul in this city of masks. "Who had that cup?" Cersei cried. "Who poured? Who?" Sansa felt the bang of her own pulse against her glove, the grit of the amethyst in it. She set her hand flat against her skirt to keep from lifting it to her hair. Cersei's head jerked toward her, not by reason but by some animal scent. The queen's hatred had learned the shape of Sansa's breathing and could find it in any room. For a heartbeat the queen saw her as clearly as a hawk sees a rabbit in a winter field, a thing that might be caught and torn. Then the queen's eyes veered to Tyrion as if drawn by iron in his pocket. "You," she said, "you did this." Tyrion blinked once. "Sister, you gave him wine," she hissed. "We all gave him wine," Tyrion said, and only after he had spoken did his mouth twist at the foolishness of the words. Tywin raised one hand. It was sufficient. Seize him. 2 white swords turned and became 2 white hands. Ser Meryn stepped, and then Ser Boros, and then 2 more behind. Tyrion did not resist. He lifted his chin and for a moment looked like his brother would look in chains. There were not many moments when Tyrion looked like any of his kin. Sansa thought she saw regret there, but for whom she could not say. Joffrey made one last sound, a purple cough that dragged strings of spit from his lips. His eyes rolled as if seeking something he had lost. Then whatever he had been seeking was not in him anymore, and the room's noise came pouring back as if some dam had been breached. Later, she did not remember leaving that room. She remembered only the echo of Cersei's voice and the steady absence where the king had been. In her bedchamber, she tore at the glove until the threads went like rotten cloth. She held it up to the candle and saw nothing. The powder was invisible. Only the glove knew. She fed it into the fire and watched the leather curl, the last stink of it rise and vanish. "Do not go alone," Shay said from the doorway. The girl had come like a cat, on soft feet and at the wrong time. "It is an angry night." "I am not going anywhere," Sansa lied, and felt the lie drop through her as a silver coin dropped from a hand into a deep well. She pulled off the hairnet, then held it for a long time, weighing it, measuring its small crooked truths. There were many stones left. She put it into the bottom of her coffer and laid 2 gowns over it, and then another. When night swallowed the windows and the Red Keep had eaten all the candles it could hold, she moved. The corridors were not as dark as they should have been. The torches multiplied like eyes. The city beyond the walls had begun to cry, the sort of crying that went with fires and the smashing of shutters. Kings died badly, even boys, and their deaths moved men to madness and devotion in equal measure. She moved like a girl in a song, except that songs always made stars brighter, and the night did its best to be an unlit sea. Ser Dantos came from a postern like a rat from a drain. He was sweating and he smelled of plum wine and fear. "My lady," he said, which was wrong, and "hurry," which was right, and then he was hurrying, his breath tearing in his throat, his soft boots slapping at stone like meat slapped at a butcher's table. The hidden ways were not so hidden when a man with a torch ran ahead. Shadows made everything a secret. They went down and over and then down again, and she lost the map of it immediately. She had learned long ago to let herself be led when there was someone to lead. It was a skill not many praised. Men liked to praise cleverness, which made them sound clever for recognizing it. She had learned other things: how to be quiet, how to make a good silence that drew no notice, how to see without looking. Northern girls did not learn such things. They learned to ride and pray and place their feet proudly in halls that were theirs. Winterfell had taught her pride. King's Landing had taken it away and given her teeth. The boat bumped like a heart at the pier. The river smelled like old coins and dead things. 2 men with faces like winter bark lifted her in before she could panic. She had one brief, ridiculous thought of dropping the hairnet into the black water and watching the stones go down like a flock of little dark birds. But the hairnet lay upstairs in her coffer under a gown that would never be worn again, and the thought was like a door being twice locked. Oars creaked. The boat glided. The city receded, its lights wavering on water like lies told on a cold night for warmth. A ship waited beyond the river's mouth, a round-bellied thing with a weeping woman at the prow. A ladder swung. A rope tightened. Ser Dantos made a sound when his foot slipped that was not a prayer and not a curse, and then he was trembling on the deck, laughing the way men laugh when they have sobbed too long. "My pearl," he told Sansa, pawing at her sleeve, "and my brave sweet dove." And then he held out a hand for payment without meaning to, and realized what his hand had done, and turned it into a beseechment. She gave him all the coins she had. She would have given him the moon if he had asked for it in the right voice. "Enough," said a man near the mast, in a voice as mild as sleep and twice as dangerous. Sansa had heard Peter Baelish speak at feasts, in the council chamber, in her nightmares. The voice was always the same. It slid. It suggested. It was a wet thing beneath stones. He stepped forward and the deck seemed smaller for having to hold him. His gray cloak made a triangle with the mast and the night. "My girl," he said, and out of habit she looked behind her to see where his girl was. When she understood the words were meant for her, she felt a strange lightness in her stomach, like hunger, or like the moment before falling. Ser Dantos turned, and whatever courage his wine had lent him fell away like stucco from an old wall. "My lord," he stammered. He bowed again. He looked like a fish considering how to curtsy. "You have done your part," Littlefinger said, "and I will do mine." He smiled. It was a gentle smile. Peter Baelish had 1,000 of those, and most of them meant nothing. This one meant death. The men with winterbark faces moved without any more noise than leaves make. There was a flash of steel in dull moonlight, as if a fish had turned in deep water and shown its side. Ser Dantos had time to look surprised, almost relieved, and then he sat down hard, and then he lay down, and then he was a man the river might have produced and taken back, not worth a question. Sansa made no sound, because someone had taken the sound out of her and hidden it in a place she could not reach. She stood in the deck's unkindness and looked at the man who had rescued and doomed her in a single gesture. He tilted his head as if to catch a song. "He would have sold you the moment he was afraid enough," Littlefinger said. "He was afraid already." "He saved me," she said dully. "I arranged that," he said, which was another way of saying I save what I buy. He took a cloth and cleaned the red from the knife with a fastidiousness that was not disgust but habit. "Take a lesson, Sansa. Vows and wine will deliver you to any man's mercy. Coin delivers you only to mine." He led her to the small cabin that smelled of wax and lemons and the hint of mouse that every ship's would remembers. When he closed the door, the night stayed out. He smiled another gentle smile and then a different one. Quieter, almost fatherly, the kind he had practiced looking at Catelyn Stark once and never had to use. "You have been brave," he said, "brave and wise. Those are the only two virtues worth the name in a city like ours." "I was not wise," she said. "I was angry. Anger can be wisdom when it chooses its moment," he said. "You chose yours well." She sank onto the narrow bed. The ship rocked and something inside her rocked with it, as if she had been hollowed out to make room for a sea. "Cersei will kill him, Tyrion." "If she can," Peter said. "She will try, but your little lion has claws men forget to look for." He poured her watered wine without asking. "The city thinks the Tyrells did this. The Tyrells are thinking about how not to be seen thinking. Tywin is thinking about how to keep the Tyrells while hanging his son. I am thinking about the veil." "The veil," she repeated, "because sometimes the mouth must act when the mind has gone to its knees." Her Aunt Lisa with the eyes that slid off faces and letters written in a hard, sharp hand. Winterfell had been a low hearth with deep banks of coals. The veil was a knife held upright. "You will be Elaine there," he said softly. "Names are cloaks. We choose ours for the weather. My name is Sansa Stark, and it will be again," he said, with a warmth that could have been mercy if it had come from another man. "But not yet. You are a chick that must sit quiet under a shadow until its feathers grow. There is a boy in the Vale. 2 boys, really, who will be helpful to you when your feathers grow." He smiled like a cat near cream. "But that is later. Sleep. We sail with the tide. King's Landing is not kind to its orphans." She did not sleep, or if she did so in fragments, in broken cups of dark water from which she woke tasting iron. Once the ship rolled and some rope sang, and she thought it was Joffrey's breath at last finding its path, and then remembered that kings do not breathe forever, no matter whose lips love them. In the morning, King's Landing was a bruise on the horizon. The ship's wake cut the water into ribbons, and the gulls kept pace like ill-mannered courtiers. Littlefinger came up wrapped in fur as if the sea were a winter park. He handed her bread, and he told her a story about a man who had been caught stealing candles and how they cut off his hand and then fined him for being a man without a hand. And while she smiled at the wrong part because she did not know where else to put her face, he watched her. "Do you regret it?" he asked, too lightly. She tasted salt and flour. She had not decided what regret was. He made me look at my brother's head, she said finally, and that was the answer and would have to be. He nodded, satisfied, as if she had written the answer he expected on a slate. In the Red Keep, they said later, the chaos had been something between riot and festival. Tywin had not raised his voice, because he did not have to. The city heard him anyway. Tyrion was placed in a cell below ground where the air remembered knives. The Queen had 2 musicians arrested because they had made a joke the year before that she had not understood and now wished to condemn. Pycelle prepared a speech full of long words about how the strangling was God's judgment on impiety and was told not to give it. The Tyrells packed and unpacked trunks, then sat down to breakfast, then rose from it. Somewhere a little boy with curly hair could not stop crying, and somewhere else a woman laughed until she made a sound like a dog being stepped on. Cersei wore black and then scarlet and then black again. She did not sleep. She drank until sleep came and woke with her mouth sour and her eyes swollen and blamed her maid for the mirror's honesty. The first time she went to see Tyrion, she brought 4 guards and spoke from the doorway, as if she feared the cell might stink up her clothes. "You have always hated him," she said, as if that could summon proof. "Do not pretend. It makes you uglier." "Even if I wished him dead," Tyrion said, "I am aware that justice is not achieved by the naked satisfaction of desire." She blinked at the phrase and hated him more for it. "You did it. If I had done it, I would have let you know, quietly, to savor your expression." She threw the cup at him. He did not flinch. The wine made a map on the stone, and the guards smirked until she turned her head and then remembered not to. Tywin came down to see his son on the 3rd day, when the city had begun to heal over the wound without closing it. He dismissed the guards because he did not need them and because he liked certain conversations to be private. He stood with his hands clasped loosely at his back, in the way of men so sure of their power that their wrists could afford to be unguarded. "You will confess," he said. "We will send you to the wall. A quiet ending, respectable enough. Your sister will not feel it shameful to be seen with you when she visits. Perhaps you will rise there, among ruffians, and make something of yourself at last." Tyrion laughed. It was not a healthy sound. "If I confess, it will be to God, not to you." Tywin's gaze did not so much harden as become indescribable. "I will hang you then. It will hurt your brother. That is a pity. He has suffered enough for your sake." "Everything I am costs him twice," Tyrion said. "You and I agree on that, at least." "I have spoken to Pycelle," Tywin said, as if speaking of a maid, and the sentence landed heavier than it should have. "You kept a store of venom and herbs in your chambers. Things men do not keep unless they intend them to be used. I kept them because my niece and nephew were born with your blood and my sister's brain," Tyrion said. "The city is a closed hand prepared to squeeze. Poison is the only weapon it neglects." "Not any longer," Tywin said. "Now it is the weapon we remember. Expect no mercy because your thoughts outpaced our attention." He left without saying more. Tyrion watched the space where he had been and imagined the ghosts that filled it. His mother, perhaps, with a kind sweetness he had been told of and could not bring to mind. Shay with her laugh he had bought. The boy who had come drunk to his bed with a girl much later called a whore. He had long ago learned which stones in his life he could not move. He had not learned to stop pushing at them. In the Reach apartments, Marjorie sat by the window and watched the way the city made smoke. She had changed her dress 3 times and her face not at all. Olenna had taken off her thorns for a moment and then found she could not bear the feel of her own skin without them, and put them back on with a mutter. "You will marry the younger brother?" the old woman said, spinning fate out of air like a housewife with wool. "It is the way of the world. Those who bake bread may have to eat it regardless of yeast." It was ever the Reachmaid's lot to take what the bannermen bring in from the fields. "I would have liked to be queen," Marjorie said. The words were childish and she spoke them anyway. "You will be queen," Olenna said. "Persons are kings. Houses are kingdoms. Girls are banners if they are clever." Her mouth softened briefly. "Do not look so bruised, child. The mother cat loses kits and still hunts." "Joffrey died like a boy," Marjorie said, and there was something like pity in it. as if death were a new game he was poor at. "Death is a game no one wins at," Olenna said. "Not even the men who pretend they made it. The Lannister father will smooth this with a piece of bread and a clean knife. He will slice his family to feed his hunger for order. He will not lose his Tyrell loaves if he can help it." "There is a rumor," Marjorie said, almost laughing because rumors in the city grew like fungus on bread and tasted as bad, "that the northern girl did it. The quiet one. Sansa." Olenna's mouth pinched and then relaxed. "Clever child, or stupid brave. The line is thin. It is good to know the wolf has teeth even without a forest." Marjorie touched the window pane and left the softness of her fingers there. "If she did it," she said, "then she killed the man who would have hurt her all her life. That is often what kills the men who hurt girls," the Queen of Thorns said dryly. "Girls or time. But time is not as quick as a mouthful of sweet wine." In the Vale, the air was so clean it made the lungs sting. Mountains climbed into sky until both seemed of the same stone. The path to the Eyrie clung to the world with a lover's desperation. From the mule basket, Sansa saw clouds below her and thought that if she fell she would drop through white forever, never touching anything hard, which would be kindness. Lisa's letters had always smelled of lavender and iron. In person she smelled of both, and of the frantic edge around sweetness where sugar burns. Her eyes seized Sansa and held her. Her mouth rushed and wept and smiled without warning. She drew Sansa to her breast and sobbed into her hair, then pushed her away to look, then drew her again, as if unsure whether Sansa were a daughter, a relic, or a mirror she had misplaced. "My precious," she said, "my sister's child. My, oh, how you look like her. Peter, do you see? She might be Cat again if we lowered the light. Elaine. Elaine, child, that is your name here. Do you know it? Say it." "Elaine," Sansa said obediently. The veil had swallowed Sansa's voice and wanted this one. She gave it. The word felt not like a lie but like a robe put on over her nakedness. Necessary. Lisa kissed her and wept again. She spoke too quickly about plans, and who would be sent away, and who would be punished for imagined slights against them for not yet having happened. She spoke of her son with a feverish glow, as if the boy were a saint's bone that cured the faithful. When the boy came, he came like a small storm. He had a weeping lip and a cold in his chest and a mind that tangled and untangled itself according to its own broken music. He flinched from strangers like Sansa might have from a blow. "Sweet Robin," Lisa murmured, kneeling, smoothing hair. "Your cousin, your RR girl. She will be kind to you. Will you be kind to her? Say the words." "I want to make them fly," the boy said dreamily, and his eyes slanted toward the moon door with an old love. "Later," his mother said, with a doting patience that made Sansa's skin creep. "Later, precious." Peter watched it all with the polite smile of a man at a small theater. When Sansa looked at him, he looked away, and when she looked away, she could feel his gaze like a shawl over her shoulders. He began to teach her the Vale the way a man teaches a child a game he intends to win with later. Names of minor lords, the gossip of gullies and spurs, who hated whom for wives and who for sheep. He took her into rooms and showed her maps and said things like, "Remember that the river is older than these castles, and men are mortals. A road can outlast us and therefore must be courted more carefully." At night she dreamed of Joffrey, not as he died but as he had been the day he made her look at what he had wanted her to see. She dreamed of the sound of the wolf's head striking the stone, the way it must have sounded though she had not heard it, of the men's laughter because they could laugh and were ordered to, and of the king's mouth smiling, and then of the blue of the sky over the gods would pool the day she had prayed and had no one here. She woke craving snow and bread. Snow came to her in time, thick, fat flakes that turned the Ares courtyard into a world from a northern song. Sansa stood for an hour with her face upturned and the flakes settling on her lashes until she laughed and rubbed them away like tears. She shaped the snow with bare hands until they hurt and shaped a wall and then a gate and then another. And when any of the men approached to offer help, she shook her head and smiled and said, "I know this place," and she did. The castle of snow rose under her like a memory unburying itself with its own patience. Keep over keep, wall over wall, a child's Winterfell raised up from cold and grief and making. When little Robert came and kicked at a tower with his small foot, she caught him gently by the wrist and said, we do not destroy what keeps us." And the boy blinked at the words as if they were not meant for him and then began to cry anyway, because he had come to cry and would not lightly relinquish his errand. Later he would throw handfuls of snow at the moon door, and his laughter would be as shrill as a gull's. Peter came when the last of the snow had exhausted her, and she stood looking at what she had made. He stood a little behind her and to one side and said, "You have your father's hands for building. He was always making something that would outlast him. I was always making something that would not." She did not turn. "I was making somewhere to stand." "You will need that," he said. After he had given the words a little time, he moved in enough to smell of clean linen and wine. "I misliked the Tyrells stealing our thunder," he said lazily. "I do not often dislike competent people. It is a poor habit in a city." "You did not kill him," she said. "It was not a question." Pause. "No. The old woman would have done it. If you had not. The difference is that in one story you were a sheep led to slaughter. In this one you are a shepherdess who butchered her own ram. Do you feel the difference when you breathe?" "I feel the same person," she said, and thought of the amethyst breaking inside her glove. "That will not always be true," he said softly. "People change when they are told they can. You have been told by the world that you could be the kind of girl who poisons a king. The world will not forget that, even if it never learns your name for it." Lisa was less forgiving than the world. She found them in the snow courtyard, and her mouth shaped itself around the sights she chose to see. She screamed words that melted as they hit the air. Sister, whore, thief, girl, name, name, name. She dragged Sansa by the wrist to the moon door and made promises to the wind. Peter came behind her slowly, patient as a courtesan's veil being drawn aside. "Lisa," he said. "Lisa, my sweet one, look at me." She did. The fury in her made the blue of her eyes almost pretty. She was breathing in ragged takes, as if the air were a debt she would never pay. "She is Cat," Lisa said. "You look at her and you see my sister, and I see that, and I see you looking, and I hate her, and I hate you, and I hate." "Shoo," Peter said. "Only love." He kissed Sansa then, lightly, properly, on the forehead like a father, as if to comfort. The gesture was simple and wrong, and Lisa's mind, already a fever, broke the rest of the way. She pushed. Sansa staggered to the lip of the sky, the world yawning coldly below, and the simple fact of how far there was to fall crowded everything else from her mind. Then Peter's hands were at her arms, and then his voice was soft and then not soft at all, and Lisa was saying, "Make her fly," and Peter said, "Only you." And then he pushed her, and the blue of Lisa's eyes were last for a long blink, and then there was only the white and the wind and the long, thin scream as the world took her. Afterward, Peter held Sansa as if she were something that might break and said, "My poor little bird, did I save you? I think I did." And she did not tell him that sometimes saving was only a different kind of drowning. The Lord's declarant came to ask questions with large manly words, and Peter answered them with smiling smaller ones that were harder to grip. Sansa sat quiet in her name's skin and said Elaine's stone with her mouth when asked. She poured wine, and when she did the memory of a different cup tried to rise and was pressed back down as if by a sober hand. She learned the veil's angles like a dancer learns a new floor. She learned who liked sweet and who liked salt. She learned when to make a silence that invited a man to fill it with his own plans. In King's Landing, Tommen was put in a heavy crown, and the crown slipped over ears too soft to bear it. Cersei kissed his hair as if kissing a wound, which in a way she did. She sent for the High Septon and then sent him away. She summoned Marjorie and smiled at her with all her teeth. The girl smiled back and counted the teeth with her eyes. The court danced on a smaller floor with a missing king's misstep still in it, and the musicians played louder to hide the hole. The Trial of Tyrion was a play performed in bad taste by expensive actors. It was held not in the September but in a hall lined with tiles that threw back every whispered slander neatly. Witnesses came who had been bought, and witnesses came who were afraid not to. Pycelle tottered and held up vials like relics and named them as if naming saints. Ser Meryn spoke and lied by omission, which was the only way he knew to lie. Shae came last, and when she spoke it was in the clear, strong voice she had always used when he had paid her to tell him who he was. Now someone else paid, and she told him he was a villain. He laughed when he should not have and demanded trial by combat, though he had no soldier's hands. It was defiance and it was despair and it was theater, and he knew it could be all three and still be fatal. The prince from Dorne came to fight for him because men love their own songs. The mountain broke him with the same care he broke anything that confronted him. Tyrion listened to the crack of skull and the wet aftermath and understood he had asked to die and been partly obliged. He sat afterward and watched dust motes turn in light like tiny insects trapped in amber. He thought of Sansa then, strangely, and again felt the odd certainty of her innocence in his own matter and her guilt in something else entirely. He had always liked puzzles. He did not like this one. Varys came to his cell at the hour when mice grow brave. "If you do nothing," the eunuch said, "you will die in the morning." "And if I do something?" Tyrion asked. "You may yet die tonight," Varys said pleasantly. "But not in that fashion. It is an improvement." They moved like a story already told to them. Varys led and Tyrion followed down stairs that smelled of old blood and under arches where spiders would have felt at home. Doors opened that should not have. Swords slept that had been wakeful all week. When they reached the level of air that remembered the sky, Varys stopped by a door Tyrion knew too well. "No," Tyrion said. He was shaking, not with fear but with the knowledge of the shape of it. "There is a ship," Varys said. "There is a woman. There is a future. And there is this door. Did you plan this?" Tyrion asked. "Be honest. Men like us play with plans the way boys play with frogs," Varys said. "Sometimes they jump farther than we expect." Behind the door, Shae Ept with her arm flung across the pillow where his father put his head. It was quick and ugly. He did not speak. When it was done, he took the chain from her neck and put it into his pocket, because a man must put something into a pocket when he has emptied himself of so much else. He went to the privy and found his father there, flesh on tile, looking up with the calm of a man who had put his spurs in a place he could reach them and was not ashamed to be caught like that. They spoke. It was shorter than fathers and sons deserved. When the crossbow bolt took Tywin, the long order of the world flexed like a rope taking a heavy weight, and somewhere very far away, a wolf might have lifted its head. Tyrion fled. Varys made him smaller than the city with a wave of his hand. Ships took him where men like him always go, to other men's wars. In King's Landing, Cersei woke to a world that had lost both her son and her father and found both losses and inconvenience to the only thing that mattered, which was the perfection of her sovereignty. She set about demonstrating it with a fury that made even fools take note. She set her watchers to watch her watchers and herself to watch the wine and the women. She took comfort where she could find it and did not ask names twice. In the Vale, Peter played his own long music. He won the Lord's declarant to his side one by making them believe they would be the last to be bought. He replaced harsh men with softer ones and then hardened the soft ones and softened the harsh. He set Harold Harding in Sansa's path the way a hawker sets a lure for a hawk. He told Sansa stories about the boy that made him sound like a song you could sing without embarrassment. He watched her listen and did not mistake the attentive chin for a heart inclining to his plans. He had learned long ago that girls listening was a gift they could withdraw like a hand from a bowl. Sansa watched the weather. She watched how the wind came at the Vale's keels and cut. She watched the boy Lord's breath fog and the way he held Peter's fingers, and she learned to make her face one that men told truths to because it promised not to punish them. When she did speak, she chose words with care. "Men like Harold," she said once, testing the sound of his name in a coil of sentences, "who have the look of a song about them, do they sing as well as they are sung?" "Rarely," Peter said, amused. "However, the world does not always require a good song. Sometimes it requires only that others believe it good." "I will meet him," she said, which was not inside the question he thought she had asked. "You will," he said, his eyes narrowing slightly, measuring and recalculating. "And he will be soothed by your hair, and by your quiet, and by your name when the day comes that he hears it spoken properly." She set her palms on the cold stone of a window that looked down into air. She wondered, not for the first time, how much of the girl named Sansa Stark still lived inside the girl who answered to Elaine Stone in rooms that smelled of lemon oil and mountain wind. She turned her palms and saw the faint shadow of scars where the amethyst dust had once burned, or perhaps only her memory of it. She flexed her fingers. "Did I do wrong?" she asked suddenly, though she did not turn. In King's Landing, Peter did not answer at once. He was very good at silences that made other people fill them and less good at the ones that promised his own truth. "You lived," he said finally. "There are men who will call that the only virtue that matters. There are men who will say what you did was wicked and make the sign of whatever god they carry in their pocket and then go and do worse in more respectable rooms. You want judgment from me because you think I own it. I do not. I own only ledger books. Balance is my god. You made a hole in the world that suited you. Others have made larger holes for less reason." Her breath fogged the glass. She drew a shape in it without meaning to, a circle and a line, a rough wolf's head, and wiped it away before he saw. "I did not do it for reason," she said softly. "I did it because there was a day when I could not bear that there would be more days like it. I thought if I broke the day, I would break the days that followed, too." "Sometimes you do," he said. "Often you only change their flavor. In some other season, perhaps, she might have slipped into thinking of herself as a villain or as a savior and found comfort in the simplicity of either. The Vale's air did not permit such easy breathing. She took to walking early, when the mountain's shadow lay long and the men at the gates were yawning and less likely to bow too low. She walked until stones filled her boots and quiet filled her head. In the kitchens she learned to ask for eggs in a way that made the cook give them without asking to whom, and in the rookery she learned which message birds hated the cold least. She said "my lord" to men who had once owned her name and smiled and made them feel as if they had done well by earning the courtesy. Once, when the snow came again, she went out into the courtyard with the boy and let him throw it at her. He was laughing, his cheeks pink with life, and she thought, "This is what I wanted. Just once. One easy day." The boy's hand seized suddenly and his face changed, and he whimpered that his chest hurt and he could not breathe, and for one hideous instant the world narrowed to wine and a cup and a color burned into memory. She knelt in the snow and put her hand on his small back and said, "Breathe with me," and pulled him soundlessly through the moment, and when it passed she did not release him until she knew it would not come back. The boy's hair smelled of soap and stale milk. She held him the way a mother holds something she knows she cannot keep safe forever and knows she must anyway. News reached even the airy, late and thin, almost sublimed by cold. A Lannister old lion felled on a privy. A dwarf vanished. A queen who drank. A young king with hands too soft for reeds. A northern bastard holding a burned wall against a winter that was not yet ready to commit itself. A sister lost, another lost further. The Vale's lords considered whether they still had an army and whether it was a good idea to find out. Peter's eyes narrowed when ravens came and widened when they did not. He began to talk more often of spring, a season he meant as a metaphor for his own arrangements. Sansa returned sometimes to the small room where she kept what few things were hers. She took out the hairnet and looked at it in the lamplight. The small black gems shone like eyes closed in sleep, and one setting was empty where her finger had worried it out. She turned the net in her hands and felt the ghost of the weight it had had once. It was a crown and a web and a chain all at once, and she had worn it. Once she lifted it as if to set it on her head and found her hands would not obey. She put it back at the bottom of the coffer and covered it again with gowns that fit a girl named Elaine Stone. She did not throw it away. Some burdens you do not cast off. You learn where to set them so they do not unbalance you as you walk. On a morning made of glass and pale fire she met Harold Harding at last. He had the look songs gave to boys. Frank, a bit foolish, handsome as a wheat field. He bowed to her as if he had been born knowing how to bow and had never learned how to do anything else with such grace. He spoke compliments that had not yet found the right ears for them. He seemed surprised to learn she had any mind at all. It was a kind of innocence. She forgave him for it because she had once been innocent enough to mistake polished manners for substance. "You dance?" he asked, while the hall watched from the edges, pretending not to. "A little," she said, and let him lead her in a slow, safe figure that did not risk the edges of the floor. He held her hand properly. She watched his eyes the way a cat watches a bird and learned how quickly they darted to Peter when she laughed, as if to make sure he was doing something right. She smiled more then, to see how many times she could draw a glance that was not meant for her. When the dance ended, he kissed her hand and said a pretty thing about stars. "You will make a good husband," she said, and saw confusion flicker across his face as if she had countered him with a move he had not been taught. "I hope you will," she added gently as kindness. Later, Peter took her to the roost edge of the sky and said, "He likes you. He likes to be liked," she said. "That will do. You are learning," he said, approving. "Do you miss the songs?" "Sometimes," she said, "but I've found I can hum them under my breath while doing other things." He laughed, startled, and for a heartbeat she saw not the moves he had laid out for himself but something unpracticed and not entirely unkind. Then the wind came and he drew his cloak around him, and the old game resumed. When the mountain storms came, she walked the galleries and counted pillars and thought of Winterfell's low warm rooms, and of a man with a solemn jaw who would not bend, and of a boy king whose last breath had sounded like a saw in wet wood. She did not count the days since. She had learned that numbers offered a false comfort. Instead, she counted the ways in which she would be ready the next time the world asked her to choose its flavor. Sometimes at night she knelt by her narrow bed and folded her hands out of a habit she could not throw away. She did not ask the old gods for anything, not anymore. They had no eyes in King's Landing and no faces in the Vale. She did not ask the new ones either. Their sept was far below and smelled of incense that made her nose itch. She said nothing but the names she loved in a whisper and listened to the sound of them like a woman listens to rain at a window, counting not the drops but the spaces between. The wind thumped at the Ares bones, and the mountains stood as they had always stood, indifferent and clean. The world moved below, and she would move with it when it came time to go down. She would go down when the roads were right and the names were right, and the song she had been humming under her breath for a long time finally found its words. When at last she slept, she dreamed of snow that did not melt and of a cup filled not with wine but with water from a cold stream, and hands cupped, and a face bending to drink, and on the air a smell like pine and smoke, and someone laughing not far away, not unkind. In the dream she did not turn to see who it was. She lifted the cup, and the water ran clear, and she swallowed it, and it did not choke her. Snow answered her in the night as if it had been listening all along, coming soft over the sky, erasing the hard black edges of stone and light until even the Ares' cruel lines softened. Sansa woke to the hush that true snow brings, a hush that goes into the lungs and quiets the body from the inside. She crossed to the narrow window and pressed her fingers to the glass. The world below was gone, swallowed in white. For a heartbeat she felt that all the old names were buried there too. King's Landing, Lion, Wolf, Rose, Kraken, and that a new name might be written cleanly. By noon there were footprints. Men must make prints on any field they see. Peter's were the most careful. He walked like a man who expected every step to be noticed by someone he could not afford to disappoint. "We go down with the first good day," he told her as the snow thinned to a sift. "The Eyrie is a summer palace with winter pretensions. The mountain wants it back. The Gates of the Moon is a fat inn by comparison, but it has heat and walls that remember boots and laughter. I'll take warmth and merriment where I can. Will you?" "I will take a door I can hold," Sansa said, and he smiled as if she'd confessed a fondness for figs. Sweet Robin made the descent into a play of terror. The boy clutched and writhed and whimpered that his belly burned, and the mules shifted their patient feet as if bored and put upon. Sansa rode beside him and talked the way she had learned to talk to frightened creatures, very quiet, narrating stones and turns in sky. She told him the names of things, and the boy listened to names, as if each were a hand on his back easing him down. when he flared into that thin, high scream that he could not seem to help. She laid her palm between his shoulder blades, not pushing, only present. The sound ebbed like a pack of dogs driven off by a steady voice. "Brave boy," she told him when the path widened and the world did not drop away under his feet anymore. "You have crossed a mountain without a sword drawn." "I have a sword," he said thickly, rising to her bait as she had meant. "Ser Lothier said he'd bring me one, when I am strong enough." "Then he will keep his word when you are strong," she said, and the boy nodded solemnly as men nod when they agree to a future that has been tidily arranged for them. The gates of the moon, like a low-bellied beast, swallowed them gladly. The heavy oaken doors shut on winter, and the courtyard heaved with stable boys, men-at-arms, pink-faced under helms, cooks shouting over cauldrons. It smelled of bread and wet leather and steam. A great log burned in a great fire and could be heard sighing as its sap protested. Sansa's breath stopped for an instant in the air before she left it behind like a small condemnation. Nestor Royce met them with a polished smile and a bow honed to a shine by practice. His daughter, Miranda, came behind, curious and bright-eyed as a jay. Her hair was as brown as the bark on the courtyard's stripped trees, and she wore her knowledge like another layer of clothing. "Lady Elaine," she said, tasting the name, and Sansa smiled as if the name were sweet. "Mistress Miranda," Sansa answered, and it pleased the girl more than a title would have. They kissed cheeks like cousins. There was talk of rooms and trunks and travel, and which servants had lost which items and how they were to be punished for it. Nestor bowed to Peter as one bows to a hawk that has learned to sit on the glove but not yet learned not to bite. "We'll do well here," Peter murmured as they followed a servant up warmed steps. "We'll do better than well. Men down here like to pretend they are tired of the mountain's airs. They'll make a court just to prove that they can. I mean to let them." At the gates there were more eyes. Sansa felt them and let herself be a vessel for their conjecture. She was Peter's bastard in their minds. A girl with no house who knew the right fork to use and could smooth a sleeve in a way that quieted a table. Miranda attached herself to Sansa immediately, which she knew Peter would count as a prophet and she would count as a kind of grace. The girl had an easy laugh and a sharper mind and the sense to hide the second beneath the first. "You grew up in a grand place," Miranda said in a low voice as they watched men practice in the yard. "You hold your shoulders like someone who expects doors to know her." "Doors do not have long memories," Sansa said lightly. "They need to be reminded." "Men have worse memories," Miranda replied. "They need to be told stories. You must tell me yours someday." "I will tell you the one I like best," Sansa promised, "and let the rest keep their teeth." There was a rhythm to life in the gates that the Eyrie had never known. Snow pressed in and the great hall pushed back with meat and music. The local lords and their ladies came, all the familiar Reachman's cousin forms that every land breeds. Solid men proud of their good land and quick to resent anyone who seemed to take the grandeur of the Vale for granted, sharp-faced lesser sons hungry and watching, widows with flinty eyes counting how many times their neighbors spoke to Peter and how near they stood. There were gifts of pheasant and apples dried on strings and a carved toy for the Lord Protector's sweet boy. There were conversations about the state of the mountain road that were only half about the road. Sansa wore courtesy like armor, as she had been taught to. She remembered names. She praised kitchens and tapestries and hawks. She listened. Men told her the kind of truth that is pulled out of them by a pleasant smile, the truth they wanted to be believed about themselves. She stacked these truths like stones in a low wall. She watched Lynn Corbray whirl through a room like a knife that had forgotten where it was heading and Lothier Brune stand like a door at Peter's back. She saw, quickly, that Nestor Royce meant to be liked for his steadiness and would pay in coin or loyalty for the pleasure of being considered indispensable. Miranda Royce walked Sansa through the castle's bones, the buttery's cool reek, the kitchen tower's heat and clang, the older, loose-laid stones of the east wall and the newer tight ones of the gatehouse. The little room where men played at Sivas and imagined themselves clever by moving dragons like counters while real dragons were extinct and real lives moved in less predictable patterns. "Lord Grafton is expected when the roads open," Miranda offered one afternoon over steaming cups of a spiced drink that was not wine and pretended not to mind. He will come with talk of Gulltown and ships and how no one respects him enough considering how much he thinks of his own harbor. I shall respect his harbor then, Sansa said. We must always give a little of what men will take too much of if we let them. Miranda laughed and then sobered. You do not speak like a girl who has never had to fight for anything. I have fought for a quiet breakfast, Sansa said. It is a greater battle than most men will own to. In the great hall Peter's court slowly flowered. There were musicians and mummers and petty suitors. There were quiet promises exchanged under the cover of louder ones, the kind Peter loved most. Sansa saw him listening to men praise their own thrift while offering bribes that were not coin. Sons placed, daughters presented with fingers that trembled, oaths sworn with eyes averted. He moved from kindness to sharpness like a man changing knives for different cuts. He brought Sansa forward at moments that showed how useful she could be. A small intercession on behalf of a squire who had spoken too warmly of his horse and offended a knight. A gentle question to a nervous steward that revealed a fraud Peter had planted and was now reaping. A song begun at a table that quieted a quarrel no one else had seen coming. He showed her letters. He closed his hand over names as one covers a candle to see if the room will choke. He said Tommen and Marjorie and watched her mouth. He said Tyrell and Faith and smiled when she did not ask for the rest. He said Bolton and watched her hands stop being hands and become something trying to be stone. They have married your sister, he said, as if naming the weather. Your father's ward, Roose Bolton's get. A clever seal to a wicked deed. My sister, Sansa echoed, and the words went through her as if they were the first to find a path since the amethyst had dissolved. What sister? He tilted his head. A girl in brown hair. A girl they have called Arya. A girl who knows the Red Tower rooms of Winterfell as a woman knows the shape of her own palms. He watched her eyes. Your old friend Jane Poole. Sansa didn't know when she had sat down. Only that the room had moved and left her with her hands in her lap like a supplicant. She saw Jane as a child, giggling behind a hand, the hand flat as a leaf. She saw Jane crying in the Red Keep, wearing other women's cast-off gowns. They will hurt her, she said, and her voice had no call, or in it. They will hurt her to make the words true. They will, Peter agreed easily. They are doing it already. It is an ugly house they have built, and they mean to weld it with screams. Sansa pressed her nails into her palms. She tried to summon anger and got only a tired grief that was both thinner and deeper than fury. Anger had stood with her when she lifted the ewer. Grief sat now and asked nothing and would not go away. Why do you tell me this? She asked. Because it is your name they eat, he said almost gently. And because you must have a reason to do what I will ask you to do. Because I could lie to you and tell you that virtue is rewarded and patience brings baskets of figs. But you are no longer a child. I have done you that courtesy at least. He sat beside her with a space between them measured and precise. Mary Harold Harding, give me the veil with your smile and your hair and the name you wear knotted inside your skin. When the time is right, we go north with banners like wings. We take your home back from men who never warmed their hands at its hearth. We are loved for it. The world pretends the rest did not happen. The word felt strange and heavy. A coin she wanted to bite to test and did not dare. And the boy. Robert will be an honored child and my ward and lord of the Eyrie in the songs men will sing about the past. He said, careless. For Peter, a mercy. In practice, he will be what any boy so weak must be. Agreed with, protected, coddled to death. I will see him comfortable. You will be kind to him. We are not monsters, Elaine. Sansa imagined a road north under banners. She imagined Winterfell in snow and smoke and the old smell of iron and bread. She imagined a girl in brown hair with the wrong name being led by the hand to a bed and men who would later use proper words to describe it. She remembered her father's jaw and the sound it made when he spoke difficult truths that did not become easier in his mouth. Arrange it, she said. Her voice sounded like someone else's. A woman out of a story that even then had never had a kind end. Arrange the match. He watched her as if he had not expected to be obeyed. He reached as if to touch the back of her hand and thought better of it. Not from conscience but arithmetic. "Good girl," he said, and she allowed the words to pass over her without entering. The first letter went to Lady Anya Waynwood, who was Harold's keeper as much as his kin. Peter paid Anya compliments wrapped around coins and coins wrapped around compliments, and attached an apology for Lynn Corbray's behavior that made the apology as valuable as the offense had been. He sent Lothier south with a word to Lord Grafton that had nothing to do with the letter and everything to do with a ship whose captain liked to speak too freely. He put a ring on Nestor's finger and a story in his ear, and set the whole hall buzzing with the prospect of a winter tourney to while away the long, cruel months. A tourney! Miranda echoed in delighted horror when the talk became certainty. Peter will have men break their arms and their purses against one another when the world is half buried. Men must be given ways to bleed that make them feel handsome, Sansa said, making Miranda laugh and then consider. The lists rose on the flat near the east wall, sketched white with drifted snow and lined with dark faces under fur hoods. Flags fought the wind. There was spiced wine and music and boasts. Men wrapped their swords and lances in leather lined with wool and still found ways to break each other's bones. Miranda's laughter spangled the cold air. Sweet Robin watched from a chair set at a safe removed from the crush, his feet wrapped, his eyes larger than his face. When he began to fidget and press a hand to his chest, Sansa placed a sweet under his tongue and told him stories about knights who had gone to sea and come back with horses taught to walk on decks. He giggled and asked if she were a horse. She said yes, and he said, "Nay for me." And she did, and the boy smiled without the boyish greed for more that usually followed any gift. For a small instant, she felt that a day had been saved from the fire. Harold Harding arrived like a song that had spent too long being rehearsed. He rode with his chin up and his cloak set just so, and a smile that landed on women like a glove lightly tossed. He kissed Lady Anya's hand in a way that said he had been practicing on other ladies' hands and thought practice made him charming. He bowed to Peter with a show of respect that was exact without being convincing. He looked at Sansa and mislaid his rhythm for a heartbeat because her face was the right face for a tourney. Fair, composed, attentive, and because her eyes did not offer the praise he usually harvested without effort. "Lady Elaine," he said, and he managed the name without any of the small sneer lesser men put into the word bastard, even when they were above pretending they did not think it. "I hear your singing can make a man forget he has only one coin left." "Then I shall not sing for you," she returned, and he laughed, correct to the play, pleased that she had set him up for laughter so he could seem the easy sort. They danced in the hall where the torches made the stone look warm. He was light on his feet and careful with his hands. Sansa let him lead, as dance demanded, and learned where he might go if he were given rooms without corners. After the first turn, he said something about snow on her lashes and stopped because the words sounded as if he had read them. She told him the Vale stars were like nail-heads hammered into the sky to keep it from blowing away. He liked that and took it for himself. She did not mind. Some words are meant to be stolen. On the lists he rode well enough to be cheered, but not so well as to frighten any man whose cheer mattered. Lynn Corbray unhorsed him and then leaned down as if to offer a courteous word and said something that made Harold's mouth harden and his ears red. Sansa watched Lynn for the joy of watching and for the necessity of it. He had a beauty the way knives and storms have beauty, linear, fleeting, unforgiving. Peter said Lynn's temper was the very salvation of them all. For a man who can be relied upon to do the wrong bold thing at the right moment is a gift if you know where to put him. At table, Harold told Sansa that he liked hawking better than hunting because hawks took finer prey and required better hands. She told him a story about a hawk in Winterfell that had refused to come to any glove but Bran's. The name slipped out of her mouth and hung there, and Harold, not stupid, heard it. He blinked once and then his face arranged itself, the way faces do when they are polite to someone who has nearly confessed a wound. "Winterfell is very far," he said mildly. "Near enough," she said. She took a sip and softened the words with a smile that promised no quarrel and hid 1,000. Letters came and went. A raven came in with feathers rhymed with frost. It shook itself like a dog and glared at everyone. Lady Anya replied with measured warmth and 2 conditions that Peter had already written for her. Grafton sent the news that a ship had been seized at anchor for smuggling fine lace and finer truths. A letter from King's Landing, stiff, formal, spoke of a young king who had taken the hand of a rose and was happier for it. Another letter spoke more loudly by what it did not say. The faith had been given back its swords. The city had given back its fear. Marjorie knelt at a candle-littered altar and felt the heat shut her eyes. She had learned to pray the way she learned to dance, by watching where other feet went and making men believe she had always known. The High Septon's voice was simple and cut clean through incense and music. His sandals made a soft sound on the September stone. He spoke of poverty as if he had invented it, and of sin as if it were a garment any woman could clip and alter. When he looked at Marjorie, there was no desire in his eyes, only the interest of a good tailor measuring a difficult customer. "You do much good," he said. "There is pride in it as well as goodness." "There is gratitude," she said, "because humility makes men lazy," and he approved that, as she expected. Cersei watched Marjorie leave the September with dislike so polished it shone. There were eyes in the streets now that belonged to men who had never had eyes before. They watched the lioness with less fear than they once had, and she saw their gaze like a peel of paint. She fed it to her rage and pretended not to notice. She sent men to ask questions and sent coin to men who would think to ask theirs last. She sent a girl to a boy with words sewn into her hem, and she sent a boy to a girl with a blade tied in his boot. She promoted foolish men so they could be hanged later. She told herself that her father's mistakes had always been his inflexibility and never his ambition, and that she would make neither. When bad news came, she broke a mirror and thought the face that looked back at her deserved breaking. A rumor rose in King's Landing like a cake with too much yeast. It said a young queen took lovers in a tower room baked to sweet heat by sun and fire. It said the lovers were handsome and struck poses in their cups and said words they'd overheard at feasts. It said this rumor had arrived at the September dressed as piety. Cersei smiled and let the cake rise too far so that it would fall spectacularly. It did, and splashed her dress as well as Marjorie's. The High Sparrow's sandals made that soft sound while he walked Marjorie to a cell that smelled of water and stone, and then made the same sound when he walked Cersei to another cell that smelled of vinegar and a lesson. When the queen came out with hair shorn and feet bloody and eyes not yet empty of pride, the city watched and made noises that carried no reverence at all. The rose survived the gesture with stains that looked like design. The lioness survived with a scar that spoke to every door she would knock on afterward. Word of these things came north thin and white-eyed, like men who have run ahead of their shadows. Peter set them aside with an expression of concern he sharpened or softened according to who was in the room. Sansa took them like letters from a distant cousin you cannot help but care for because they carry your features in different order. Cersei's shame was less interesting to her than the line about a marriage consummated with wreaths and sweets, and the line about the faith's swords was more alarming than anyone who read it without a map in their head seemed to know. Men with prayers and blades are worse than men with blades alone, Peter said idly over a list of provisions for the kitchens. They'll die for the right to tell you why you're sinful. Do they marry? Sansa asked. He looked up, then smiled at himself for being surprised. Not the ones with blades. Then they are men without children who will order mothers to suffer, Sansa said. We had a septa who said a man without children must be kept on a short leash in winter or he'll eat the bread meant for the babes. Septa Mordain, Peter said, and he made the name into something like a jewel he had once seen and misplaced. I have never quite understood how to feel about the women who taught you. They put such good knives into your hands, and then ordered you never to use them. I have used them, she said. I would like to forget how. She looked down at the lists and then out, where the flags beat their time in the wind. When do I meet Lady Anya? When the world is warm enough to pretend it is safe, he said cheerfully. We will go to Iron Oaks and let her look at you until she believes she has chosen the girl herself. She likes to feel she keeps a brood hen's oversight. We will give her eggs shells to count. Iron Oaks felt like a seat that had been polished by calloused hands for centuries. Anya Waynwood had a face like a hawk who had earned the right to be suspicious. She let Sansa kiss her, then made her sing, then made her walk the length of a hall with books on her head because it amused her to see a pretty girl do something disciplined and plain. When Sansa returned with every book still on her crown, Anya smiled in a way that had nothing of girlhood in it and said, "A wife's steadiness is as good as a husband's sword in lasting wars." "I have always thought so," Sansa said. She and Harold talked in the gallery where the sunlight came in silver and the dust made the air gentle. He told her he had once fallen off a horse as a boy and broke his tooth and could not eat apples for a season and that he had felt weak for it. She told him that once she had dreamed Winterfell's gods would had eyes in every leaf and that when she woke she did not wish to tell anyone because it would make it less true. He told her a secret about Lady Anya's cook. She told him a lie about King's Landing that was close enough to the truth to pass. He bent and kissed her in the measured, courteous way of a man proving he knows how to do it properly. She let him, and in the kiss she tried to find any spark of a hearth she could stand to warm her hands at for a winter. She found some comfort there, if not heat. Perhaps heat was for other seasons. The betrothal was spoken softly first and then loudly. Rings were measured, not yet made. Peter staged the announcement like a play that let even the men who had not been cast feel they had a role. Sweet Robin clapped at the wrong places and had to be told when to stop. Miranda squeezed Sansa's hand hard enough to make the bones remark upon it and whispered a joke about dowries that was wicked and fine. Lynn Corbray smiled like a man seeing a lie he approves of. Nestor Royce stood taller for having stood near it. After, Sansa went alone to the gallery that looked down the mountain's flank. The day had the odd blues it gets when cold is old enough to contain itself without wind. Even the sky seemed to have learned not to speak too loudly. She pressed her forehead briefly to the cold stone of the embrasure, then rested her hands on it. She could see the path they would take in spring swimming through the snow like a river through milk. Down to Gulltown in ships, perhaps, or west into greener fields when they came. She could see the north as a door she meant to knock on in her own name. She could see a girl in brown hair walking very carefully with her hands by her sides and her eyes big and dry. "I am sorry," she said into the air that carried sound away without echo. "I am sorry that I did not know how to save you then. I will learn. I swear it." She did not say for whom the promise was, because she did not know. Perhaps for Jane, perhaps for Sansa, perhaps for a third girl not yet named who would one day need this adult woman's steadiness the way the boy needed her hand on his back. Winter held while men tried to pretend it was a visitor. There were more dinners, more games, more small presents. Peter was at his most gracious, which meant he was at his most dangerous. He softened harsh men. He too coppered proud men who could not tell which coin was the cheaper. He praised Harold in public and trained him in private by giving him small humiliations to live down, the way one strengthens a hawk by denying its favorite meat until it comes when called. Sansa watched and learned and tried to keep a piece of herself that did not belong to anyone. Sometimes she dreamed of the cup again. The dream adjusted itself as dreams do when told too often. She felt less fear and more impatience in it now, and sometimes sorrow took its place entirely. Once, she dreamed that she lifted the cup and there was no poison and Joffrey drank and smiled and lived and her life was a road made of smaller knives. She woke with tears on her face for a boy she had come to hate fairly and truly. She wiped them on the pillow's clean linen and told no one. From the north came a letter that had a manderly seal and tasted of salt. It spoke of wolves with heads of bone and pork pies that contained secrets and a dead man walking in one city while being dead still in another. It asked after Lady Arya, in a way that would be tender if it did not carry a blade hiding in a fold. Sansa held it too long and then passed it to Peter, who smiled the way he did at stories in which bakers and fishermen outwitted lords. "Lord Wyman is no pastry," he said, "but he bakes nicely. Will he rise to meet us?" Sansa asked. "He will rise to meet anyone who brings him the story he most wants to be true," Peter said. "We will be that story when it suits us to be." She turned the letter and saw a blot where a pen had been lifted quickly. It looked like a bear's paw. "Davos Seaworth," Peter mused, seeing her see it. "He has a reputation for being a man whom misfortune does not belittle, which makes him rare. It also makes him poor," Sansa said dryly, and Peter laughed with pleasure at her cruelty because it was a small real thing in a world where so many men offered counterfeit pleasures. In the morning she walked with Miranda to the rookery. The maester was one of those men whose hair had decided to grow only where it made his head look less like an egg. He was gentle with the birds and short with the men and adored Miranda the way old men adore girls who call them wise. Pouches of message grain hung like little stomachs. The birds turned their heads to Sansa, then Miranda, then Sansa again, counting their way through life's simple sums. If you could send one message to any one person and know it would arrive, Miranda asked out of nowhere, playing one of the games she liked. Who would you send it to and what would you say? My mother, Sansa said without thinking, and then had to take air slowly afterward as if she had tripped. I would say I am trying. Miranda's hand came down on her sleeve, a small pressure and then gone. That would be enough for any mother I have known. You do not know the one I had, Sansa said, but she said it kindly. She would have wanted me to do more than try. She would have wanted me to win. Then win, Miranda said practically. If Peter is your ally, make him an ally and then make him your step. If Harold is your husband, make him a husband and then make him your door. If I am your friend, make me your friend and then make me your mirror. You speak like a woman who has never been afraid, Sansa said. She meant it as a compliment. It came out as an accusation. Miranda watched her mouth and smiled because she was clever enough to know the difference. Oh, I am afraid all the time, Miranda said. I am afraid every day I will have to marry an uninteresting man. That is fear enough to keep anyone sharp. Nights bled into one another until, all at once, a day came with warmth that made men loosen collars without thinking and women stand in doorways to feel the sun touch their faces. The snow began to rot at the edges. The roofs fan-shed their last grudges in sloughs that broke and fell. The old men cocked their heads and listened to the drip as if it were a language. The mountain was ready to let the world go down again. Peter made his final arrangements in a flurry of epistles and private words. He walked with Nestor before dinner and afterward with Lynn, and at dusk with Grafton, and late at night with Lothier Brune because the door to Lothier's mind was always open to him. He had a word with the maester and 3 with the cook and looked into the cupbearer's eyes and said, "Don't," without explanation. He went to Sansa and said, "We will visit Lady Anya again and then Gulltown for a show. We will smile until our mouths ache, and then you will see the sea, Hild, and perhaps remember there are other greens than pine." "I remember," Sansa said, thinking of the Blackwater's olive slither and then throwing the thought away as one throws a fish bone into the fire. They went. The road down was like undoing a knot. It was alive with men and carts and goats, as if winter had been simply a long, inconvenient night. Sansa watched people's faces. Winter changes faces. It makes sharp ones sharper and soft ones uncertain. It had chafed Harold into a slightly better man. It had rubbed Peter's smile thinner, made the skull behind it peek through. It had left sweet Robin unchanged, which was not mercy. Gulltown had the smell of distant places. Sails multiplied on the water like white leaves. Men shouted in accents that made even common words look strange. Girls wore their hair in ways that said they had seen enough of the world to be bored by it, and boys ran with ropes like dogs who had found new sticks. Sansa went to the quay with Miranda before the others and watched ships swing on their tethers and thought of the ship from King's Landing and the cold wax smell and the shape of a man dying tidily on good wood. Then a small boat bumped against the stone with a comical seriousness, and a child nearly tumbled into the water, and the spell broke. Peter saw Lord Grafton and set a series of small fires that would warm his own pocket without burning anything he needed to keep. Sansa was walked and talked and seen by the right eyes, and rumors took shape like foam into a cresting curl. Lord Baelish's bastard's beauty had made a knight fall to his knees. Lady Waynwood's heir had found a gentle, sweet girl and would be the better for it. The veil would keep its strength until such time as strength was welcome. Loyal men love loyal plans. At Iron-Oaks, Anya asked Sansa to sit with her among ledgers and said, "You know why I chose you? Because the Lord Protector asked you prettily?" Sansa said, honest enough to please and unflattering enough to seem honest.
Anya snorted.
"He asks prettily for everything. He has hands that were made to hold a quill and a knife and nothing else. I chose because the boy needs a woman who will not be fooled by the first smooth thing he says. He is proud and a little dim, like many handsome men. He will sicken of the first woman who tries to be his mother, and of the second who tries to be his sister, and of the third who wants to be his conscience. You are none of those. You are a hearth. You look like a man could stand by you and not be colder for it. Sansa had to bite the inside of her cheek to keep from laughing out a startled sound. "Thank you," she said. "I will try to be warm." "Do," Anya said. "The veil needs it." They stayed 3 nights. On the last, Anya brought out a chest with old cloth in it and made Sansa choose a piece for a wedding gown. "If the gods and the snows allow us one." Sansa chose a bolt the color of frost on grass, pale green, almost white, with mended sections you would not see unless you went hunting for flaws because you needed to be right. Anya nodded once, as if approving a figure in a column, and closed the chest and told a story about her aunt that was wicked and probably half true. They left with gifts and 2 hawks and provisions and promises that would break into fates later. On the road back, Peter rode alongside Sansa and said, "You have a face made for old ladies' liking. It will take you farther than beauty with men only." "I have found old ladies to be the most dangerous opponents," Sansa said. "They have no time for practice. They are always striking." "So am I, little bird," he said, too pleased with himself to hear the warning in her tone. "Plans are a kind of tide. They pull everything with them and then break against something no one wishes to concede was there all along." From the north came word icier than any packet of ravens had yet carried. Stannis Baratheon had marched into the snows and vanished, or conquered, or died. Winterfell held a bride and a monster. The Manderley fleets had teeth. Karstarks tilted like weathercocks. From the Riverlands came a murmur that Riverrun still stood, and a Lannister with a golden hand had sat down in a tent and learned the patience of sieges. From the wall came a rumor of dead men that had grown too tall for fear. Peter set his jaw against the wind and kept count of ships and men as if arithmetic could make a weather back down. Then a whisper came of a different shape. A girl had escaped Winterfell with a broken creature and been chased through snow by dogs and men and a kind of hunger. The girl had been taken again or not, had died or not, had found good men or fallen into worse. Sansa held the rumor the way one holds a bird that has flown unexpectedly into a room, gentling it with her hands, trying not to crush it while keeping it from breaking its own neck against a window pane. She went to Peter's solar and found him with the shutters open, so that the cold could stand beside his chair and advise him. "If she lives," Sansa said. "Jane, if she lives." "If she does," Peter said. "She will be a coin in men's pockets again. Perhaps a kinder purse this time. Perhaps not." He watched her. "If she is dead, she is beyond all of us and beyond the names they put on her and the one that hurt her." "I want her," Sansa said. The words surprised both of them. "Do you understand? Not for a story, not for a plan. I want my friend taken from the mouth of whatever beast holds her." He did not smile, which told her more than any expression. "That is a very stark desire," he said neutrally. "They like to snatch babes from wolves with bare hands and call it justice. I had forgotten you were born to that." "I was born to learn to be kind and stern at once," she said. "It is harder than anything else I have tried." He tilted his head as if listening for the next line in a song. "If she lives, and if she comes within the reach of my coins, and my reach extends as far as my coins always do, then we may see her in the Vale before long. There are men who owe me deliveries. The world may, for once, obey a decent wish because it is already walking that way for other reasons." She studied his face. "Do not bring me hope because you like to watch me eat it." He made a soft sound and lifted his palms. "Dear heart, I am not a man who believes in hope. I believe in ports and purse strings and men who cannot keep secrets." "Then tie one of your strings to this," she said, and left him to imagine which string would hold. In King's Landing, Tommen was growing into a boy who did not like loud voices, and Marjorie was artfully soft around him like fur, and Cersei was sharper than a nail on a poor man's only shoe. The High Sparrow was fashioning law from rope and wood and piety. Word came that Cersei had walked weeping, and that afterward she had stopped weeping and had begun to plan to make other women weep for her. Sansa read the line twice and had no more time to give it than that. The tourney at the gates of the moon came round again with the false spring that teases men into forgiving the world for wanting to kill them. It was smaller than the first and more crowded with hungers too long denied. Harold tried his lance again and broke it twice, then took a blow that stunned him and left him on his knees blinking tears he was too proud to let fall. He came to Sansa afterward roughly handsome with bruises and wanting her to tell him he was brave. She did, and he warmed like a boy in sun. Miranda whispered that he would be better in bed for being made to feel like a knight after being taught he was not one. Sansa told her wickedly that it made a dull art finer. Lyn Corbray found a reason to quarrel with a man who had more kin than sense and drew Lady Forlorn just enough to make the hall recoil, and then laughed and kissed the man on both cheeks until the man's kin did not know whether to be insulted or slain. Peter's eyes followed Lyn and measured chaos the way a baker measures flour. Later he would send Lyn to whisper near a group of men Sansa had not seen speak to one another all winter, and later still she would hear that one of them had struck his brother and another had sent a letter he would regret. When at last a rider came with a girl behind him, their horse all bones and breath, snow in their hair like salt, dogs baying far behind, it was not Jane. It was a shepherd's daughter from the foothills and her brother, half frozen and terrified because men had ridden after them believing the girl might be someone else. Sansa took them to the kitchens and made the cook scowl but serve them, then found them a place near the stables where the boy could sleep near horses and believe in warmth that way. Peter watched and said nothing. Later, he made certain men who had ridden with hounds receive a letter that turned them into someone else's problem. The shepherd's daughter stared at Sansa with an awe that made Sansa feel like a thief. She taught the girl to hold a spoon properly because it was the only kindness she knew how to force on the world in that hour. Letters came flecked with melt. Lord Wyman made a boast with pies in it larger than any man had right to make and lived. A raven from the wall told a hand's-breadth tale about a man with snow in his name who had been made into a man in a way other men could not manage. Another letter was cruder and louder and smelled of soot. A pink thing with a black hand in it. Laughter set down in words. Peter burned that one without letting it finish its talk. Sansa watched the paper blacken and curl and thought of how laughter could be the ugliest sound in the world when used to say the wrong things. Sometimes we answer letters with silence, Peter said. It is the most expensive reply, and thus the most valued. Silence and plans carried them into a spring that was wounded and limped but came anyway. The snows shrank to reveal earth that looked surprised at its own color. The sea turned from iron back to water. The mountain shook its shoulders and let men go up again. Peter opened his hands and released certain secrets he had been holding like birds in cages. One of them flew to White Harbor, another to Old Town, a third to the fingers of a certain Bravosi factor who liked his wine sweet and his ventures bloody. He told Sansa things he did not need to tell her because he liked the feel of her attention. He lied to her well about other things because habit is a kind of skeleton for men like him. On the day they were to call the betrothal and engagement, Sansa woke from a dream in which she had been in Winterfell's Godswood with leaves the color of blood wet again and a face in the weirwood that was not a face she had seen before but knew all the same, and the face had leaned down to her and spoken her name with a voice like wind through pine. She held the dream the way one holds a bowl too full and moved slowly through the morning so as not to spill it. In the hall she met Harold in good linen and a fresh bruise, and he smiled at her with relief, as if she could make him into the thing men would praise without his having to change at all. She put her hand in his and for an instant saw the road he offered. Then she looked past him at Peter speaking to Nestor with his hand on the steward's sleeve, at Sweet Robin trying to stand with a small man's version of dignity, at Miranda rolling her eyes behind a veil, at Lyn unable to stand still, and felt all of it. The weight of places and promises, the pull of plans, the press of a world that would not bend simply because one girl wished it. A servant carrying a tray of cups brushed her elbow, and for a moment she smelled a sweetness that made the breath catch in her throat and set the cup down with a care that frightened her. She looked at the cup and saw only clean, plain wine. She closed her eyes and breathed in, and there it was again. A ghost of a smell, the memory of purple in her mouth. She opened her eyes and saw only a room and a future. "Do you regret anything?" Harold asked in a rush, as if the question had been waiting in him for hours and had finally kicked his ribs. "Yes," she said, "And I intend to do it better." He laughed as if she had made a jest. The room clapped at the right time. The maester cleared his throat and spoke the words that tie and can be untied. The day slid forward on its greased rails. In the night, Sansa stood on a balcony with the storm's edge pulling at her hair. The stars looked closer than they had in a long time, as if the mountain had lifted her into the sky's lap. A bird called. Another answered. The door behind her opened on quiet hinges, and Peter came out and stood at a distance he measured in heartbeats. "You were splendid," he said. "I was sufficient," she said. "Do not make me more than I am. It will make you clumsy." "I am never clumsy," he said, and then smiled at himself again. "Almost never." He stood and let the silence be theirs for a while. When he spoke again, it was the voice he used when no one else was listening. "There will come a day when I tell you a thing you must not do, and you will do it anyway. On that day I will be very angry with you. It will be a hard day for both of us. It may be that we will part and never meet again in a way that is not war. I think of that day sometimes. I try to make plans for what I will do without you. The plans are poor." "Do not make plans," she said, and saw his face tilt. "Do not make plans for what we will be to one another on days yet to come. Make plans for what I will do to the men who come between me and my home. Leave my making to me." He looked at her with something he had not chosen on his face. He bowed as if to a queen. "As you like," he said, and this time it was not a lie, not entirely. She watched him go and then watched the sky go pale at the edges. She thought of the path north as a ribbon that would be pulled at last, undoing a parcel that had been wrapped with malice and banality. She thought of her name. She said it under her breath like a charm that could begin and end things. When dawn came, it came cold and clean. The mountain carried sound down in small fragile bowls. Somewhere a hawk dropped and rose again. In the kitchens, the day began with crackling and a girl humming over dough. Sansa went to her little chest and opened it. She lifted the hairnet and looked at the small dark stones that had once felt like snow and then like coals and now felt like pebbles by a river she had to cross. She shut the lid gently and left the thing where it was, with the knowledge of it, like a scar under a sleeve. In King's Landing, a boy king woke with a start and reached for a warm place beside him and found only covers. And a queen looked out a window at a city that had forgiven her nothing and said words under her breath that no one would forgive her for either. In White Harbor, a fat lord sat back content with a story that tasted good both ways. In the Riverlands, a castle that had once held a fish pretended to be stone. On the wall, the wind made a sound like men learning to be brave too late, and a fire burned with red eyes. In the dread fort, a man smiled without lips. The world went on with or without wives and vows and girls with names, but names matter because men believe they do. Sansa set her feet in shoes that had been meant for another girl and made them hers by walking. When the first banners were raised for a progress that would be as politic as any battle line, she mounted her horse with quiet grace and thought of the words her father had once spoken to her without knowing how they would grow in her. Winter is coming. Yes, but not only winter. Other things come as well, and some are brought and some are made. She looked east to where the sun would be later and north where it was not, and then down the switchback road and smiled at the impossible length of it. She put her heel to her mare. The beast moved. The world turned. She kept her hands light on the reins because she had learned that you cannot drag a creature where it must be coaxed, and because she knew now how to lead.